Miguel Rodriguez had been driving the same route to Denver General Hospital for 3 months, but on December 15th, 2019, the familiar 40-minute journey from his home in suburban Colorado would become the most consequential car trip of his family's lives. At 78 years old, Miguel was an experienced driver who had navigated Colorado winters for over 5 decades, but the combination of an unexpected snowstorm and a moment of distraction would create an accident that seemed destined to destroy 3 generations of his family in a single, devastating moment. Miguel wasn't making this trip alone. In the passenger seat sat his daughter Carmen Rodriguez Martinez, a 45-year-old high school principal who had taken the day off work to accompany her father to what they both hoped would be their final consultation with Dr. Patricia Jennings, the genetic counselor who had been coordinating their family's medical care for the past year. In the back seat were Carmen's 8-year-old twins, Alex and Sofia, who had been excused from school because the appointment was expected to involve discussions about their future medical care and treatment options. The Rodriguez family had been dealing with a complex genetic mystery that had taken months to unravel. It had started 18 months earlier when Miguel began experiencing episodes of severe abdominal pain that his primary care physician had initially attributed to normal aging and digestive issues. But when the pain became debilitating and was accompanied by unexplained weight loss and fatigue, more extensive testing had revealed the presence of a rare genetic condition called hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, or HHT, which caused abnormal blood vessel formations throughout his body. HHT was a progressive condition that could affect multiple organ systems, creating arteriovenous malformations that could cause internal bleeding, strokes, and other life-threatening complications. What made Miguel's diagnosis particularly concerning was that HHT was an autosomal dominant genetic condition, meaning that each of his children and grandchildren had a 50% chance of inheriting the same disease. Subsequent genetic testing had confirmed the family's worst fears. Carmen had tested positive for the HHT gene mutation, as had both Alex and Sofia. All 4 family members were carriers of a genetic time bomb that could begin causing serious symptoms at any age, and that would require lifelong monitoring and treatment to prevent potentially fatal complications. The December 15th appointment was scheduled to be their final consultation with the genetic counseling team before beginning a comprehensive treatment and monitoring plan that would involve regular medical screenings, preventive procedures, and lifestyle modifications designed to minimize the risks associated with their condition. Dr. Jennings had recommended that all 4 family members be present for this appointment so that they could coordinate their care and ensure that everyone understood the long-term management plan. Miguel had been looking forward to this appointment because it represented a transition from the uncertainty and fear that had dominated their lives since the initial diagnosis to a proactive approach that would give them some control over their medical futures. Carmen had been more anxious about the meeting because she was struggling with guilt about potentially having passed a serious genetic condition to her children, but she was also hopeful that early detection and intervention would allow Alex and Sofia to live normal, healthy lives despite their genetic inheritance. The twins had been remarkably resilient throughout the testing process, treating their medical appointments as adventures and showing the kind of adaptability that children often demonstrate when facing circumstances that would overwhelm many adults. They had been excited about missing school for the appointment and had spent the morning asking Miguel questions about the hospital and what the doctors would tell them. The drive had been proceeding normally until they reached the stretch of Interstate 25 that approached downtown Denver. Miguel had been maintaining a safe speed and following distance despite the increasingly heavy snowfall, but the combination of deteriorating visibility and holiday traffic had created challenging driving conditions that required constant attention and adjustment. Miguel was an experienced driver who understood winter weather conditions, but at 78, his reflexes and vision were not what they had been in his younger years. He had been considering whether he should continue driving, particularly during adverse weather conditions, but he had been reluctant to give up the independence that came with being able to transport his family to important appointments. The accident occurred at approximately 2:47 p.m., according to the Colorado State Patrol report that would later be filed. Miguel had been driving in the right lane when a semi-truck in the adjacent lane began changing lanes without adequate clearance. Miguel attempted to avoid the collision by steering toward the shoulder, but the combination of snow-covered pavement and his overcorrection caused his vehicle to lose traction and slide across multiple lanes of traffic. The Toyota Camry carrying the Rodriguez family collided first with a concrete median barrier at approximately 35 miles per hour, causing the vehicle to bounce back into traffic where it was struck by an oncoming pickup truck traveling in the opposite direction. The secondary impact occurred at a combined speed of nearly 70 miles per hour, crushing the driver's side of the vehicle and causing catastrophic damage that seemed incompatible with survival. Emergency responders arrived at the scene within 6 minutes of the accident, but the initial assessment was grim. The vehicle was so severely damaged that the first responders assumed they were dealing with multiple fatalities. Miguel was unconscious and trapped in the driver's seat with obvious signs of severe head trauma and internal injuries. Carmen was conscious but disoriented, with apparent spinal injuries that had left her unable to move her legs. Both children were conscious but in severe pain, with Alex showing signs of a traumatic brain injury and Sofia exhibiting symptoms of internal bleeding. The extraction process took over an hour as emergency crews used specialized equipment to safely remove each family member from the wreckage while protecting them from further injury. Miguel required immediate intubation at the scene due to respiratory distress, while Carmen was immobilized on a spinal board due to suspected vertebral fractures. Both children were conscious and able to communicate with paramedics, but their injuries were serious enough to require immediate transport to the trauma center. All 4 family members were transported to Denver General Hospital, the same facility where they had been scheduled for their genetic counseling appointment just 3 hours later. Dr. Patricia Jennings, who had been preparing for their afternoon consultation, instead found herself coordinating with a trauma team that was working to save the lives of the family she had been treating for genetic disease. If this story truly touches your heart, let it speak for you. Like this video, subscribe to be part of our journey, and share your feelings in the comments. The initial medical assessment in the emergency department confirmed the severity of the injuries all 4 family members had sustained. Miguel had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, multiple rib fractures, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention. Carmen had sustained a complete spinal cord injury at the L2 vertebra that had initially paralyzed her legs, along with ruptured spleen and multiple pelvic fractures. Alex had sustained a concussion and a fractured skull that was causing dangerous pressure on his brain, requiring immediate neurosurgical intervention. Sofia had suffered multiple abdominal injuries, including a lacerated liver and damaged intestines that necessitated emergency surgery to prevent life-threatening internal bleeding. The trauma team at Denver General worked through the night to stabilize all 4 patients, with multiple surgical teams operating simultaneously to address the most life-threatening injuries. Miguel underwent emergency surgery to relieve pressure on his brain and repair internal bleeding in his abdomen. Carmen required surgery to remove her damaged spleen and stabilize her spinal fractures. Alex needed a craniotomy to relieve swelling in his brain, while Sofia underwent abdominal surgery to repair her damaged liver and intestines. By the morning of December 16th, all 4 family members had survived their initial surgeries, but they remained in critical condition with uncertain prognosis for recovery. Miguel was on life support in the neurological intensive care unit, with doctors unsure whether he would regain consciousness or suffer permanent brain damage. Carmen had survived her spinal surgery, but the complete severing of her spinal cord at the L2 level suggested that she would never walk again. Alex had survived his brain surgery, but the extent of cognitive damage from his head injury wouldn't be apparent until he regained full consciousness. Sofia had made it through her abdominal surgery successfully, but she had lost significant amounts of blood and required ongoing monitoring for complications related to her liver injury. Dr. Robertson, the trauma surgeon who had coordinated the family's care, told the hospital's administration that the Rodriguez case represented one of the most severe multi-victim accidents he had seen in 20 years of emergency medicine. The fact that all 4 family members had survived the initial impact and the first 24 hours was remarkable, but their long-term prognosis remained uncertain. What the medical team didn't initially realize was that the extensive imaging, blood work, and surgical procedures required to treat the family's traumatic injuries were beginning to reveal the presence of the genetic conditions that had brought them to the hospital in the first place. But instead of simply detecting these conditions, the trauma they had experienced was actually beginning to address and correct some of the problems that HHD had been causing in their bodies. The first indication that something unusual was happening came 3 days after the accident, when Dr. Chin was reviewing Miguel's postoperative imaging studies. The CT scans that had been taken to monitor his brain injury recovery also showed his chest and abdomen, and Dr. Chin noticed that several abnormal blood vessel formations that should have been present based on Miguel's HHD diagnosis were no longer visible. Dr. Chin consulted with Dr. Jennings, the genetic counselor who was familiar with the family's medical history, to understand whether the imaging changes could be explained by normal variation or technical issues with the scans. Dr. Jennings was puzzled by the findings because HHD-related arteriovenous malformations typically remain stable or worsen over time, rather than disappearing spontaneously. "This doesn't make medical sense," Dr. Jennings told Dr. Chun during their consultation. Miguel had documented arteriovenous malformations in his lungs and liver that were clearly visible on imaging studies taken just 2 months ago. These abnormal blood vessel formations don't just disappear on their own. Dr. Chin ordered additional imaging studies to confirm the findings, and the results were even more surprising. Not only had Miguel's existing arteriovenous malformations resolved, but his overall cardiovascular health appeared to have improved dramatically. His blood pressure, which had been elevated due to HHD-related complications, had normalized. His lung function, which had been compromised by abnormal blood vessel formations, had improved significantly. The medical team expanded their investigation to include Carmen, Alex, and Sofia, looking for similar changes in their post-accident medical status. What they found defied medical explanation and challenged basic understanding of genetic diseases and their progression. Carmen's post-accident imaging studies showed that arteriovenous malformations in her brain and spinal cord, which had been detected during her initial HHD screening, had completely disappeared. More remarkably, the spinal cord injury that should have left her permanently paralyzed was showing signs of healing that exceeded normal recovery expectations. Sensation and limited movement had returned to her legs within a week of the accident, something that should have been impossible given the severity of her spinal cord damage. Alex's brain imaging, which was being performed to monitor his recovery from traumatic brain injury, revealed that developmental abnormalities in his brain's blood vessel structure, which had been causing learning difficulties and tension problems, had somehow been corrected during the trauma and surgical intervention he had received. His cognitive function was not only recovering from the accident-related injury, but was actually better than his baseline performance before the crash. Sofia's abdominal imaging showed that liver abnormalities related to her HHD condition had resolved completely during her surgical recovery. The arteriovenous malformations that had been causing intermittent internal bleeding and digestive problems had disappeared, and her liver function tests were better than they had been in years. Dr. Chin consulted with specialists in genetics, neurology, cardiology, and gastroenterology to understand how traumatic injuries and surgical interventions could have corrected genetic conditions that were supposed to be incurable. The consensus among the medical experts was that what they were observing was medically impossible based on current understanding of genetic diseases and trauma recovery. Dr. Amanda Torres, a geneticist from the University of Colorado Medical Center, was brought in to consult on the case. After reviewing the family's medical records, imaging studies, and genetic test results, she confirmed that the changes in their conditions were unprecedented in medical literature. Hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia is caused by mutations in genes that control blood vessel development, Dr. Torres explained to the medical team. These mutations are present in every cell of the body and cannot be corrected by surgery or trauma. What we're seeing in the Rodriguez family violates basic principles of genetics and cellular biology. Dr. Torres suggested that the family's dramatic medical improvements might be related to some kind of epigenetic changes triggered by the severe trauma they had experienced. Epigenetic modifications could potentially alter gene expression without changing the underlying genetic code, but such changes had never been documented in response to traumatic injury, and they typically couldn't correct the kinds of structural abnormalities caused by HHD. As the Rodriguez family continued to recover from their accident injuries, the resolution of their genetic conditions became even more apparent. Miguel regained consciousness after 2 weeks and showed no signs of the cognitive impairment that doctors had expected from his brain injury. More significantly, the symptoms that had brought him to medical attention in the first place, the severe abdominal pain internal bleeding, and fatigue had completely disappeared. Carmen's recovery from her spinal cord injury exceeded all medical predictions. Within 3 weeks of the accident, she had regained full sensation and movement in her legs. The arteriovenous malformations that had been present in her brain were completely gone, and the chronic headaches and vision problems she had been experiencing before the accident had resolved. Alex and Sofia's recovery from their traumatic injuries was complicated by the fact that they were children, but their improvement in areas related to their genetic condition was remarkable. Both children showed improvements in cognitive function, physical coordination, and overall health that went far beyond recovery from their accident injuries. 6 weeks after the accident, all 4 family members had been discharged from the hospital with injuries that healed faster and more completely than medical experts had predicted. More importantly, follow-up genetic testing confirmed that while they still carried the gene mutations associated with HHD, the expression of these genes had been altered in ways that prevented the formation of arteriovenous malformations and other complications. Dr. Chen documented the Rodriguez case in a medical journal article that attracted international attention from researchers studying trauma recovery, genetic diseases, and the intersection between physical injury and genetic expression. The case became a reference point for studies of epigenetic modification and the potential for traumatic stress to trigger beneficial changes in gene expression. But for the Rodriguez family, the scientific implications of their case were less important than the practical reality that they had been freed from a genetic condition that would have progressively worsened throughout their lives. The accident that should have killed them had instead given them a chance to live without the fear of sudden internal bleeding, strokes, or other complications that HHD typically caused. Miguel returned to his pre-accident level of activity with energy and health that he hadn't experienced in years. The chronic pain and fatigue that had been limiting his daily activities were gone, and his cardiovascular health was better than it had been in decades. He was able to resume driving and maintain his independence, though he chose to be more cautious about winter weather conditions. Carmen was able to return to her job as a high school principal with physical capabilities that exceeded her pre-accident condition. The chronic headaches and vision problems that had been affecting her work performance were completely resolved, and she felt more energetic and focused than she had felt in years. Alex and Sofia returned to school with improved cognitive function and academic performance. Alex's attention and learning difficulties, which had been attributed to his genetic condition, were completely resolved. Sofia's digestive problems and growth delays, which had been caused by her liver dysfunction, disappeared as her liver function normalized. The family's improved health was accompanied by a deepened appreciation for life and family relationships that emerged from their shared experience of surviving a potentially fatal accident. The months of recovery had brought them closer together and had given them a perspective on life's fragility and preciousness that influenced all their subsequent decisions and priorities. 1 year after the accident, the Rodriguez family returned to Denver General Hospital for follow-up appointments that confirmed the ongoing resolution of their genetic conditions. Dr. Chun and Dr. Jennings continue to monitor their cases as part of ongoing research into trauma-induced genetic changes, but the family's health remained stable and improved compared to their pre-accident status. Dr. Jennings, who had been preparing to coordinate lifelong medical management for the family's genetic disease, instead found herself documenting one of the most unusual cases of spontaneous genetic condition resolution in medical literature. "I've been working with HHD family for 15 years, Dr. Jennings said during a follow-up interview about the case, and I've never seen anything like what happened with the Rodriguez family. The accident that should have been the worst thing that ever happened to them turned out to be the event that saved their lives from a genetic condition that would have eventually killed them." The Rodriguez case attracted attention from researchers around the world who were interested in understanding how traumatic stress might trigger beneficial genetic changes. Several universities initiated research programs to study whether controlled medical trauma could be used therapeutically to treat genetic conditions, though ethical concerns limited the scope of such investigations. Dr. Torres, the geneticist who had consulted on the case, published several papers about the Rodriguez family's experience and its implications for understanding genetic disease and treatment. Her research suggested that certain types of severe physical stress might activate cellular repair mechanisms that could correct genetic abnormalities under very specific circumstances. The Rodriguez case shows us that the relationship between genetics and health is more complex and dynamic than we previously understood. Dr. Torres wrote in her research conclusions, "While we cannot recommend traumatic injury as a treatment for genetic disease, this case demonstrates that the human body has repair capabilities that we are only beginning to understand." 2 years after the accident, Miguel celebrated his 80th birthday with health and vitality that he hadn't experienced since his 50s. Carmen had been promoted to district superintendent, a career advancement that would have been impossible if she had continued to struggle with the chronic health problems caused by her genetic condition. Alex and Sofia had both become honor students, with academic achievements that reflected their improved cognitive function and overall health. The family established a foundation to support research into genetic diseases and trauma recovery, using the attention their case had attracted to raise funds for medical research and patient support. They also became advocates for improved emergency medical services and trauma care, recognizing that the quality of their initial treatment had been crucial to their survival and recovery. Miguel often reflected on the irony that the worst day of his family's life had ultimately become the day that saved them from years of progressive illness and early death. "I used to think that accident was the most terrible thing that could happen to our family," Miguel said during a speech at a medical research fundraiser. "Now I understand that if we hadn't had that accident, we all would have died slow, painful deaths from the disease we were carrying. The crash that almost killed us actually gave us our lives back." Carmen echoed her father's perspective, noting that the accident had taught the family important lessons about resilience, the unpredictability of life, and the importance of cherishing time together. "We learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can turn out to be blessings in disguise," Carmen said during an interview about the family's experience. "The accident taught us not to take our health or our time together for granted, and it showed us that miracles can happen even in the most terrible circumstances." Alex and Sofia, now 10 years old and thriving academically and physically, had limited memory of the traumatic aspects of the accident, but clear understanding that the experience had somehow made their family stronger and healthier. They had become interested in science and medicine, inspired by the research that their case had generated and the possibility that they might someday contribute to helping other families facing genetic diseases. 3 years after the accident, the Rodriguez family's case continued to be studied by researchers investigating connections between trauma, genetics, and healing. Several medical breakthroughs in understanding genetic expression and cellular repair had been inspired by the unusual changes that had occurred in their bodies following their car crash. If you made it all the way here, it means this story truly held you. So don't leave without showing some love. Hit like, subscribe to stay with us, and drop a comment. I'll be here, reading every word you share. Dr. Chun had used insights from the Rodriguez case to develop new protocols for treating trauma patients that took into account the potential for injury-related stress to trigger beneficial physiological changes. His research had contributed to improvements in emergency medicine and trauma surgery that had benefited hundreds of other patients. The family story had also inspired changes in how genetic counselors discuss prognosis and treatment options with families facing hereditary diseases. The Rodriguez case had demonstrated that genetic conditions thought to be incurable might be more treatable than previously understood, encouraging researchers to investigate new therapeutic approaches. 5 years after the accident, the Rodriguez family had fully integrated their experience into their understanding of their lives and their future. They continue to be monitored by medical researchers, but their health remained stable and improved compared to their pre-accident condition. The arteriovenous malformations that had characterized their genetic disease had never returned, and their genetic markers continued to show beneficial changes that prevented the expression of HHD-related symptoms. Miguel, now 83, remained active and healthy with the energy of someone decades younger. Carmen had achieved significant success in her educational career while maintaining excellent health and physical capabilities. Alex and Sofia had grown into healthy, academically successful children with bright futures that would not be limited by genetic disease. The accident that had seemed destined to destroy the Rodriguez family had instead revealed the resilience of human biology and the mysterious ways that traumatic experiences could sometimes trigger healing rather than harm. Their story became a testament to the unpredictable nature of life and the possibility that even the most devastating events could carry within them the seeds of redemption and renewal. The car crash that saved 3 generations from death had taught the Rodriguez family that survival was not just about escaping immediate danger, but about discovering the hidden strengths and capabilities that could emerge from the most challenging circumstances. Their experience had shown that the human body possessed repair mechanisms that exceeded medical understanding, and that the boundary between trauma and healing was more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. Their story continued to inspire medical research, support other families facing genetic diseases, and demonstrate that hope could emerge from even the most desperate situations. The Rodriguez family had learned that miracles could take many forms, and that sometimes the events that seemed most likely to destroy us could instead become the experiences that saved our lives and revealed our deepest capacities for healing and growth. The accident that threatened to end their family line had instead given them the opportunity to live full, healthy lives and to contribute to medical knowledge that would benefit countless other families facing similar challenges. In surviving their traumatic experience and emerging with improved health and deeper appreciation for life, the Rodriguez family had demonstrated that human resilience could transcend the limitations of genetics, medical prognosis, and even the most devastating physical trauma.